I'm not thrilled about covering this. Over on the secondary channel, which is Necosaurus Live, if you want to go check that out, please do. There's a link in the description. I covered the recent Kansas bill that took away temporarily, technically for an amount of time, the ability for anybody who was trans to drive. Now, yes, there are ways around that, just like there is with anything, but I gave an anecdote in there about how even temporarily taking away somebody's license or temporarily taking away somebody's ability to drive in an inopportune time can cause a domino effect on a bunch of areas of their lives. That said, I have found a YouTuber who I have not seen before, but thanks to my right-wing algorithm channel, I'm finding all kinds of YouTubers that I hadn't seen before, and it is this guy. This is Brad, and I haven't seen Brad's video, but it's called Trans Activists Aren't Coping Well, and it's getting unhinged. So, okay, let's go ahead and see what we're doing here. Let's go ahead and begin. And I know that there's a conversation in here about what happened with Kansas, because it just happened, like, this video is really, really recent, so I'm assuming that that's going to be there. Let's go ahead and see what's going on here.
It is now illegal for people who are openly trans to drive in the state of Kansas.
And we're already factually inaccurate. And if you're
Okay, but that's not factually inaccurate, because, like, if every trans person has their gender marker scrutinized and then suddenly their IDs are invalid, they are not allowed to drive until the minute where they change their license. Like, that's not a factual inaccuracy, that's just what happened. But okay, let's see what's going on here.
I'm appalled by this. I am appalled by you.
Oh no, friends, we've let him down. I've seen this story trending. I've got some strong thoughts and feelings on it, but I just did not get to it this week. So I decided to sit down and record a little bit of bonus content for y'all and discuss this. But basically, there's a very widespread backlash right now, particularly in LGBT and kind of progressive activist circles. A lawsuit has already been launched by the ACLU trying to stop it after Kansas, which has a Republican supermajority state legislature, has gone ahead and basically rescinded or canceled the driver's licenses of roughly, I think it's 1,500 to 1,700 trans individuals who had previously, when it was allowed, changed their sex. It's not a gender marker, it's a sex marker to an incorrect response. So like if the person is a trans woman, they would have changed back when this was allowed their sex to say female, even though their sex is male. Well, the new Okay,
so let's go ahead and first point out that when it comes to sex, yes, I understand that the sex and gender is different, right? Sex is about the physicality and gender is about the mentality. That's probably the easiest way to put it down. I'm just curious, exactly how much of one's sex needs to be altered medically before we're okay with just calling that a sex change? Because, like, that is the word we've used for that for the longest time, right? Gender reassignment surgery, we used to just call that a sex change. I don't know. That feels kind of like a weird thing to scrutinize. But okay, this might be one of those things. This might be one of those videos where he hangs on technicalities. He hangs on all the technicalities possible, where the lived reality of everybody involved may be one thing, but because of the technicalities that don't necessarily line up with the lived reality of everybody involved, he's going to claim being correct on all technicalities. That seems to be the vibe I'm getting. Again, I've not seen this guy's channel before. I've not seen his videos before, but let's see what's going on. Stop says, ew, Brad Polumbo. I'm not familiar with the guy, so, like, but what can you tell me about him, Stop?
Majority Republican legislature wants to cancel that out. And so they passed a law about a month ago enacting this change. And then letters just went out this week, post-dated, I think, Monday, informing people that their licenses had been rescinded and they had to get new driver's licenses. And it has led to some confusion, some pushback, some legitimate criticism of the policy change that I do agree with, and then also some unhinged hysteria across social media and the internet. So we're going to get into all of it. First, here is CNN. They're reporting, just summing up what's happened.
Around 1,700 people in Kansas are about to have their driver's licenses declared invalid. Why? Because they're transgender.
I was angry and terrified at the same time yesterday.
A new state law requires driver's licenses and birth certificates to list someone's sex as assigned at birth.
They told us that there was no grace period and that our driver's license or IDs would be invalid on February 26th.
The law, SB 244, passed this month with a Republican supermajority in the legislature overriding Democratic Governor Laura Kelly's veto.
So that seems to imply that the thing you did and you're like coming up next thing is incorrect, because that is the lived reality of those people. Their driver's licenses were taken away. It was illegal for them to drive for however long it took them to get new driver's licenses, and they had to get driver's licenses that did not reflect their own material realities anymore. Okay.
Kansas officials expect to cancel about 1,700 driver's licenses and reissue up to 1,800 birth certificates. Other states restrict gender marker changes on IDs, but Kansas goes further, requiring some changes that were previously approved to be reversed. Siobhan Kirstein is a custodian at the University of Kansas who is transgender.
I've lived in Lawrence, Kansas for 8 years. I came here for grad school. I love this community. It is one of the best communities I've ever lived in. I have friends, despite the fact that we love this place, that we do not feel safe in Kansas anymore.
Gabriel Padilla is a math teacher in Wichita who is transgender. He told CNN he hasn't received a letter about his ID yet, but is expecting one.
Honestly, I just want to be Gabriel. And being Gabriel means having the same gender marker, having my birth certificate, everything has changed.
Okay, so I want to... This is a fascinating part of watching other people's reaction videos, right? You get to look at their facial expressions. You get to kind of have an idea of how the wheels are turning in the guy's head. So, like, what... Let me know in the comment section, like, you know, do the subscribe thing and all the other shit that YouTube likes. Engagement with YouTube videos does mean that videos perform better, and my channel is in a place where I would like it to perform better. That said, looking at his face, what wheels do you think are turning in his head right now? I can't tell you what those are because I cannot read minds. I think it would be dishonest for me to try to tell you, like, as the person, you know, effectively selling a narrative on this, what is going through his head right now. But in the comment section, what do you think is going through the head right now when you see this face as somebody is telling you their own lived experience?
Supporters of the law say it reflects what they describe as basic biology and a return to what voters want on gender policy. Those affected say it changes daily life.
This affected not only our ability to drive, but anything else that you use your ID for.
So there's a lot to say about this issue more broadly, but also about that CNN package that we just watched. Notice how they dedicated one sentence to try to articulate the Republican position here, and they interviewed 2 different transgender people who were affected, and no one who supports the law or to provide, like, a balanced segment would have had one of these trans individuals and then also a supporter of the law or someone in the legislature or an...
Okay, so maybe you forget that CNN is controlled opposition, though it may be. It is roughly Democratic. Like, Fox News is going to do the same thing. Fox News is going to skew this story to the right. CNN is going to skew this story somewhere left-ish. Oh no, a law was enacted and there were people affected by the law, and CNN talked to the people who were affected by the law. Okay? I don't see the actual problem there. That doesn't seem to be much of an issue from my perspective. Because, like, this is the what is the meme where you have the guy in the middle who's saying, hey, we need to have compromise. Now, what's your position? Oh, I just want to be alive. I want to live. And then you look at the other guy. What's your position? Well, I want that guy to die. And then you sit there in the middle and you go, surely there has to be some way we can meet in the middle. Like, I'm sorry, but if you are the victim of a law, then I don't see a problem with a news reporter interviewing exclusively the people who are affected by that law. Like, that doesn't seem to be a problem to me. But I don't know, maybe if anybody from your audience hits this video, maybe if this breaks containment, there's going to be a bunch of people going like, it shows bias. Like, yeah, fucking all news is biased. All of it. Every bit of it. Every single bit of it. You don't have biased news. That doesn't exist. That's a fucking lie. Anybody that tries to tell you that there is unbiased news is lying to you. That is somebody trying to sell you some shit.
Activist who supports biological sex recognition and actually kind of tried to present both sides of the issue, but this was clearly a package meant to provide a very sympathetic perspective to the trans individuals, not necessarily an unbiased overview. Just be aware of that, though it's still worth, I think, listening to, but always have a critical thinking lens on it. Anyway, here's...
Okay, yeah, we can both recognize that, and...
More from the Kansas City Star. Kansas informs trans residents their driver's licenses become invalid on Thursday. Here's the reporting. Transgender Kansans are being informed on the eve of a new state law going into effect that their driver's licenses will be considered invalid as of Thursday. Please note, and this is from the letter that was sent out, please note that the legislature did not include a grace period for updating credentials. That means that once the law is officially enacted, your current credentials will be invalid immediately, and you may be subject to additional penalties if you are operating a vehicle without a valid credential. That's what was from the letters that were mailed out by the Kansas Department of Revenue, their vehicles division. They were dated Monday. So these letters went out on a Monday, and as of the Thursday, so it takes a couple days for mail to get delivered. So it's possible that these individuals received a letter in the mail on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday that their license was now invalid as of Thursday. And this legislation included no grace period. That's the one, I think, because listen, We'll get into the reasons why, but I think it is fair and not, an insane attack on people's civil rights to have government documentation accurately list your sex. And your biological sex is an immutable characteristic based on the structure of your reproductive system. And so if your driver's license says...
So that's another one that's interesting because, again, we recognize, and this is just a hypothetical question, how far down the ability to modify somebody's sex, how many modifications, which specific modifications do you consider the valid ones to let somebody change that sex marker on the ID? It also, you can say like, oh, it's important, but like you need to articulate why that's important. Like, sure, the sex assigned at birth is important when talking with your doctor because there are certain things that they are going to have to know, like whether or not you have a prostate, right? But if we're talking about just the government in general, why is that as important? Like, they know you're you. They know your name. They know your social security number. They have all of that information. And on top of a birth certificate, on top of an ID, they should have a list of changes for any of those things. Like, all of those things will be on a government database, even after you update them. So why is it important? You have to be able to articulate why is it important for these things to be reverted. Again, if the government, as it operates, has a history of these things, then that shouldn't matter. This is literally just taking a group of people and saying, hey, y'all specifically, we are going to inconvenience y'all. We are going to remove one of y'all's rights for an amount of time, and then who knows if we'll do it again, right?
Sex, it should then list your correct sex. Now, maybe you could make the argument it doesn't need to be on there at all, or that it should say...
I can make the argument that doesn't need to be on there at all. I don't think it's pertinent information. And again, whether or not it is pertinent information now, it's on the birth certificate that they would have had issued originally. And any changes to that birth certificate would be noted on a record. And if they're not, then surely that is the thing. Like, surely our government should be the thing that is inconvenienced, not the actual citizenry that pays the fucking paycheck of the government.
A gender identity or something else, or that there could be an additional, it could list your sex as male and then another category that says gender identity as trans woman or something. But to
so we get to have these specific markers on things where people don't get to live just as woman or as man. They have to. They don't get to ghost. They do not get to stealth in any way, shape, or form. They always have to have that. So like, what is now? Granted, he hasn't made this point. But there is a point that I have seen made on the right very, very frequently that trans people make being trans a huge part of their identity, and that is frustrating, that is agitating. And I can understand that perspective. I can. Just like when somebody, the stereotypical like 90s gay personality, when somebody actually like internalizes that personality and that is who they are, like that can be an exhausting person to be around. But the thing is that if you keep on taking rights away from people, you inadvertently create a world where those people have to be focused more internally on their own identity because, well, you keep on making it, like you with society, keep on making it about that identity, so they don't really get much of a choice in the matter. So that's interesting. Jasta says it's not even removal because they can go back and get a license with the gender identity they identify with. Anselin says no, they said it must match sex on birth certificate. Jasta says it's pay the state to inconvenience you. Yeah, there's weird shit. Anyway.
It is not controversial, it is not dystopian, and it is not an attack on anyone's civil liberties to say that we...
Is it not an attack on anybody's civil liberties? Do you not consider, like, being able to drive around and get to work? Like, is that not a liberty to you? Do you not consider, like, the right to travel something that is enshrined by the United States Constitution? Because last I checked, it kind of was. I don't know.
You actually have to accurately reflect your biological sex in your government documentation. I've always found it a head-scratching claim that you have a civil right to list inaccurate information on your government documents. But anyway...
But it's not inaccurate information if they're trans. Like, this is... I guess if you're to make the argument that, oh, well, the sex marker being different, that is inaccurate information. But again... any government database should have a history of those changes, and therefore, as long as you have an accurate ID, as long as you have an accurate social security number, then you have access to all that information, period.
We're going to go through all of this. I will just say, though, that I think that is the most legitimate criticism and pushback, is that this is a way to do this, right? To not give them a 30-day grace period or something. Or other states have just mailed people new licenses. So I covered this in Florida when They made changes and then some
that would be one way to do it. Like, just mail them the new licenses at the very least. And if they have the other license and they choose to have that one front, then yeah, sure, they can, whatever. That's at least like the less shitty way you could go about it. But there's also something to be said. There's also something shitty to be said about like removing that specifically on the licenses. So as an example, right? So Saki, my girlfriend, she's trans, and on her birth certificate, it has her listed as female. She had that changed. There was a whole court case in Alaska where she actually got that changed. And her driver's license lists her as female. When she went in for us to get our passports, the passports revoked that. And when we got mailed our passports, the passport said male. Now, this is one of the reasons why I have definitive proof that the government does have resources to show the history of the changes on those documents, because I have seen her birth certificate and I have seen her license. So I know what they look like, I know what they show, and I know that despite those things, when we got our passports, the passport listed male. So I know the government can do that shit, right? That's not outside of their power. That's not outside of what their databases have. But there is something very, very shitty about when you're a trans person. There are some trans people who do not want the transness of their identity to be a forward and facing object in their lives. There are plenty of trans people who they want to be treated as the gender that they see themselves as, and that's it. They don't want to think about the fact. Said, wait, Saki got her passport with a corrected BC? Yes, she did. So I'm assuming I am assuming that what you mean is Saki got a passport by handing them the birth certificate that she had that has her gender marker as female. If that is what you mean, then sure. But shorthand in chat means I can sometimes get shit wrong, and I'm not going to do a back and forth about it. And now I'm derailed. Okay. Where the fuck was I? Like, no, here's the thing, like, because Lady Marilyn is mentioning, like, I was astonished because I was scared to apply for mine. Okay, no. It has been a year into Trump's presidency. It has been a year into his presidency. If you are scared to apply for your passport as a trans person right now, then that is evidence that you should be applying for your passport, because if you don't have your passport, your ability to get out of the states that you are fucking scared of is limited. No. Stop that. As somebody who cares about you and your well-being, as a viewer of my channel, if you are trans, go fucking get your passport and leave this place if that is what you feel you need to do. That is a-okay. That is an all right thing to be, but just sitting there being scared about trying to get the passport done is literally saying, I was so scared of the gun aimed at me, I did nothing to stop it from firing, knowing that by doing nothing to stop it from firing, it was inevitably going to fire. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me at all. It is just a paralyzed response where the predator is aiming at you. You know that you're paralyzed with fear. By being paralyzed with fear, you know that the predator is going to get you because you cannot run anymore. So you have to make a decision. that I understand that's what fear does. It is an illogical survival response. I understand. That is why I am sitting here going, no. Shake. Get your fucking passport. Al Stretch says, make sure you stock up on gender-affirming lobsters before you leave the country. Becky says, you were talking about how the government has information other than the current birth certificate, driver's license, other paperwork list because of Saki getting her passport. Gotcha. We'll get back on topic for the video itself, but like I said, I need to, but hard for my autistic brain. Just you wake up on a day you have off and you just go do it. Like it is a 20-minute process to apply. That's it. Anyway.
Activists found a way to like get around it. They just mailed them a new license that said their actual sex on it, and then a letter informing them their old license was invalid. So with like 1,800 people or whatever, a better crafted bill or better policy could have been to send them new licenses. But it's not really fair to put someone in this jam where they have like 24 hours to go get a new license, and they have a job or kids or a life, and they can't, if their license is invalid, they can't drive to the DMV. Like, I do think the way that was done and carried out, I mean, you could argue they should be paying attention to the state legislature and
no. Okay, so I understand you're putting up a hypothetical hypothetical. This is not a point on you specifically, Brad, but I will say that anybody who is arguing that like people should always be paying attention to the politics around them, I agree in a perfect world, but no, there are people who just want to like wake up and eat their cereal and go to work and come home and play video games, and that is perfectly valid. It is perfectly valid to not have the spoons to deal with all of the shit happening in politics, right? That's okay. That is a reasonable position to be in for most adults. I would argue that they should, yes, pay attention to politics so they can do shit about their politics that are being fucked up in front of their own eyes, but it's still.
Know that a bill passed the month before, sure, but a lot of people don't follow the news that closely, and I think there's no reason, other than maybe spite or animus, or incompetence, to not have included some kind of grace period here, and I do think that is unreasonable and unkind. And
so, I think a lens that maybe would help you, Brad, maybe it would help you, is use the fact that no grace period was given to analyze the onus behind the bill. Because like if we're looking at it like purely analytically from the perspective of is there some reason for the government to have this information written accurately? Sure. Again, they have that information written quote quote accurately on their databases. We know that for a fact. I have evidence that that is a fact because this has been the lived experience of me and my girlfriend. So regardless of that, regardless of any argument for, like, in favor or against the documentation thing, ask yourself this: why was no grace period given? For what purpose would you do that? Why would you write a bill such that the end result was suffering? I'm going to give you a hint with that. The purpose of a system is what it does. Whenever you ask yourself, how is this system broken? How could it possibly have like been handled in a way that inconvenienced or hurt people? Remember that somebody deliberately wrote every word of that bill. That bill was written for a purpose. And you can have bills that are written for a purpose on the surface that inadvertently create something else down the line. So, as an example, I remember Republicans getting really fucking pissed off at California legislation years ago because California made it to where it was no longer a felony to knowingly infect somebody with HIV or AIDS. Now, the question you got to ask there is, what was the purpose of the bill? Because Republicans focused, I remember Hunter Avallone specifically, back when he was very right-leaning, focused very heavily on the idea that actually, no, California wants you spreading the fucking AIDS virus around, and that's bad, and just the stupidest fucking shit you can imagine. The reality of it was, though, that the legislation as it was written said that you knowingly had to infect somebody, and that was what caused it to be a felony. And by lowering it to a misdemeanor, the idea, the hope, was that people would be more willing to get themselves tested. Because the loophole that people had found was that if they did not get tested for STDs, then they could have sex with the people they wanted to, and if people got STDs, they would handle that when that happened, but they wouldn't get a felony. Like it was literally them going, do I handle something by going to jail or not? And the answer for most people is going to be that they want to try to avoid jail. So to make it to where people were able to report more, because by making it a felony offense, they actually increased the amount of people in the state that had HIV and AIDS, which of course is a burden on the medical system and is terrible for everybody that is infected by it. We got lots of ways to treat it now, but that doesn't mean that it is not still a life-altering condition. So by changing that law, Republicans at the time focused on California apparently being pro-infection or pro-bug chasers. But the reality was the rate of infection in California actually went down after that law was enacted, because without it being a felony for people to knowingly infect others, suddenly knowing that you had an infection, knowing that you had a disease, was no longer something that carried a sentence of felony offense for anybody that you possibly could have slept with. And now suddenly people were able to get treated for whatever diseases they might have had. People knew when and where to abstain, how to use protection better. Like, suddenly the situation got way better in California. So again, through that lens, I want you to look at this bill and ask yourself, why would a bill be made without a grace period? Why would a bill be made in such a way that it not only accomplished the goal of the bill, which ostensibly is accurate reporting on government documents, but it also did it in such a way that made 1,700 trans people suffer? Ask yourself that question. And you know what? In the chat, ask yourself that question as well. People are in the comment section. Let me know what you come up with for that particular scenario. Because I feel like when you do things in a way that deliberately hurts people or deliberately inconveniences people, the purpose of a system is what it does. If it accomplished that goal, then assume that that was a goal that the system wanted to accomplish.
And so I don't support that aspect of this. But I will say that the response is just always so hyperbolic and over the top to anything, and especially when it comes to trans issues. You have people claiming this is like going to be voter suppression in a way that makes no sense. You have people saying this is like step 7 of the trans genocide, and we're going to go through all of it. I'm going to show you guys a clip from an Instagram video that...
Okay, so can we talk about that real quick? Let's talk about the steps of genocide. Okay, so what is genocide? We've actually got a... Where is it? This is just the list of genocides. But, okay, concept of genocide. So, let's define some terms here, okay? Because I feel like people have a misunderstanding of genocide. 1,700 people out of the 3 million in Kansas were affected. Why the hell did they pass a law to target 0.05% of their population? Yeah, ask yourself that question as well. It's always a good idea to. But, okay, Polish Jewish lawyer, and I'm using Wikipedia, so, you know, bite me. Everybody who argues against Wikipedia can go fucking try to edit a Wikipedia article and then watch it get changed back in like a week and see, oh, right, maybe there is some factual information over on here. But anyway, Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin coined the term genocide in response to world events such as the Armenian Genocide and World War II. His initial definition was the destruction of a nation or of an ethnic group in which its members were not targeted as individuals, but rather as members of the group. The objective of genocide would be the disintegration of the political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and the economic existence of any national group. Lemkins brought this proposal to criminalize genocide to the newly established United Nations in 1946. Opposition to the convention was greater than Lemkin expected due to states' concerns that it would lead their own policies, including treatments of indigenous people, to be labeled as genocide. A bunch of countries like the United States and the Soviets were worried that, oh no, if we accept this thing as a crime, we will be accused of this crime. Yeah, they fucking did that. Canada did that shit. The United States did that shit. Lots of people did that shit. Jesus fucking Christ. Now, the 1948 Genocide Convention defines genocide as any of the following acts with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Now, there is an argument that we'll get into here in a second about expanding the kinds of people that can be targeted, because the problem with this definition of genocide is that despite it having all of the mechanics required for a genocide to be applied to anybody, it only allows nationalities, ethnicities, racial groups, or religious groups. So if there's any other way you could splice a minority and we were to enact policies to try to eliminate that minority, it technically wouldn't be called a genocide by the UN standards there, not because the acts of genocide were not done, but because the label of the group could not be applied, and that's a weird one. But anyway, it is any killings of members of the group causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of that group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So, for instance, when you've got countries that say that for you to get your gender marker changed, you need to be sterilized. That is definitionally an attempt to stymie births from that group. Anybody that tries to argue that like an autistic person shouldn't be allowed to have a child is also arguing for the genocide of autistic people. Like that is what that is. And you may not like the fact that genocide as a term applies to more than just the World War II annihilation of the Jews, but it is in fact a broader term. When we are talking about what a genocide is, there are 7 steps to that. And stage 7, you jokingly said, is the plan. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms like the Nazis' phrase, the final solution, to cloak their intentions. Acts of genocide are disguised as self-defense if there is an ongoing armed conflict or civil war, such as in Bosnia. So, an example of this, the protect our children and safety of women's spaces. These are the euphemisms that actually mean get rid of trans people from outside social life. And let's go to the United States and talk about what's going on over there. Sue E. Spivey and Christian Robinson have argued that the ex-gay movement, which encourages transgender as well as other LGBTQ people to renounce their identities, advocates for social death, and therefore could meet the legal definitions of genocide. Well, some legal definitions of genocide. They also argue that by waging a culture war using hate propaganda and misusing scientific research to gain public legitimacy, the movement seeks to deploy state powers and the medical profession to perpetuate genocidal acts on its behalf. Transgender journalist Emily St. James has described some U.S. laws as meeting the criteria mentioned in the United States definition of genocide, including laws banning gender-affirming care, which of course causes serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicts on the group conditions of life calculated to bring out their physical destruction in whole or in part, and those allowing child protective services to pursue child abuse claims against parents of children receiving gender-affirming care, and will remove said children, which is, of course, the forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In fact, actually, Canada did a lot of this with its native population, where kids were yanked away from their native parents and taken to indigenous fucking schools. And then it points out all the bills that have been introduced that are just against trans people. Like, you can argue against the use of the term, but the term is being used purely academically. And, like, that is inconvenient for a lot of people who want to argue that, oh, well, trans people have the same rights as everybody else. These are the same people who would argue that a rich person and a poor person have the same rights when it comes to being allowed to sleep under a bridge. Neither of them are allowed to sleep under a bridge. Therefore, this law is equal and unilateral, despite the fact that the poor person is the only one who's truly going to be affected by it. Anyway, let's continue.
As of when I first polled it, had 1.4 million views. And this guy is raising the alarm in a truly hysterical way about this policy that was just enacted in Kansas. Let's listen.
It is now illegal for people who are openly trans to drive in the state of Kansas.
And we're already factually inaccurate. It is not inaccurate. It is not illegal for people who are trans to drive in the state of Kansas. It is illegal to use driver's licenses that inaccurately state your sex.
Right. And if 1,700 trans people in Kansas have driver's license that quote, quote, inaccurately state their sex, then those people are not allowed to drive in Kansas. So it's not an inaccurate statement, actually.
So a trans person, like a trans woman who presents as a woman and asks to be called she, her, and all of this, can drive in Kansas. They're just going to have a license that says male on it. I know a lot of trans people who have always...
It's not illegal for a Jewish person to go around Germany in the late 1930s. But it would be bad for them if they were caught without their special armband that denoted what they were supposed to be. If you want to see a fun representation of this, just go watch Attack on Titan.
Done that, who never changed the documents. And it wasn't that big an issue for them. So I just don't appreciate the over-dramatization of this.
It's not an over-dramatization. For 1,700 people, that is their lived reality. He just described the lived reality of 1,700 people. And again, like with any law, you have to ask yourself, what lens should I view this law through? This law was enacted in such a way that it actively hurt 1,700 people in Kansas. Why, specifically, was that done?
State of Kansas. That's an insane sentence, but it's true. The state of Kansas sent out letters demanding that trans people surrender their driver's licenses immediately and warn them that if they were caught driving with a license that didn't have their gender that they were assigned at birth, they could face up to 6 months in prison.
I mean, that's just a weird way of describing the same penalties that anyone could face for driving without a driver's license.
Again, this is the poor person and a rich person are both not allowed to sleep under the same bridge, right? This is that law. Let me explain for maybe somebody who doesn't understand the analogy. So you've got a person who cannot afford a home, and then you've got a person who not only can afford a home, but can afford multiple homes. For each of these people, it is equally illegal for them to sleep under a bridge. We have a law that says that you can't sleep under a public bridge. Neither of them can sleep under the public bridge. Only one of these people is actually going to be affected by that, though. The person who can't have a house, not being able to sleep under the bridge means there is one less place where they are allowed to get out of the rain, where they are allowed to get out of the snow, where they are allowed to get out of inclement weather conditions that could hurt and or kill them. The rich person is never affected by this. It doesn't change anything about their day-to-day life. But the trans person is. Or sorry, in this case, the poor person is. The reason that I bring that up is anytime you say the statement that, oh, well, it's equally illegal for anybody else to drive around with these stupid documents, right? But how many of us who are cis people are actually going to be changing our gender markers on our licenses? I don't think it's going to be that many, right? So we are disproportionately unaffected by this law, whereas trans people are disproportionately affected by this law. And you kind of see where I'm going, right?
See how this is all like very misleading, and yet millions of people are being presented with this as if it's fact.
But it is a fact. It is not misleading because that is describing the material conditions of those people. Ask a trans person in Kansas who did get inconvenienced by this how they feel about having that right revoked and just out from under them for any amount of time.
In prison. Do you know who is allowed to have driver's licenses in Kansas? Murderers, rapists, people with 4 DUIs.
What, like, I just don't understand what that has to do with anything. You know, it's like, okay,
so you murder somebody, and then that is not a reason to rescind your driver's license until we can apply a new driver's license. But you are trans, so we can rescind your driver's license. You see why that's different? Why that point was brought up, my guy?
Murderers not supposed to be able to drive if they're out of prison. Maybe they should stay in prison, but if they're going to be let out of prison, I guess they have to drive to have a job and be rehabilitated or whatever. But it's like also trans people are allowed to drive and have driver's licenses. They just have to list their biological sex on them. I don't understand. I mean, I do understand the reason.
Yeah, the trans person has to lie to themselves about who they are on their license in order to... Do you not see how that's like a deliberate form of humiliation for those people? Again, ask yourself why the law was enacted.
That's why this is. But I bemoan the fact that we are just incapable, especially on social media, of having any sort of reasonable discourse or nuanced conversation about literally anything ever without immediately descending into hysteria and misinformation and panic and fear-mongering.
So no matter what these ignorant weasels say, this law is not about safety.
So, is it fear-mongering? Absolutely. 100%. Is it panic-inducing? Absolutely. 100%. But I have a question. If I fearmonger in order to present the valid case that there is going to be a fire in this house in the next 3 or 4 hours, what is the purpose of me doing that? It is to raise the alarm. It is to get people to understand that they need to get the fuck out of the building because the building's about to be on fire. So when you see a law like this, if you are somebody who has had your rights revoked before, or you are a student of history who has seen rights revoked from people in multiple nations, then to you, this is a scenario where you're not looking at this law in isolation. You can't look at it in isolation. You are looking at this law as if it is a red flag for something else. Think of it like you're a person in an abusive relationship, and you leave that abusive relationship. You get out of it, and suddenly, as you're talking about your old relationship with your friends, they're telling you about all the red flags that you missed. How many of you have had that conversation? It's an uncomfortable one, but they start pointing out how, hey, you know how he said that you shouldn't go out with your friends that night, right? And that he always had some excuse to stop you from doing that? Hey, you know how he seemed to get really awkwardly mad about you cooking a meal that he wasn't in the mood for? I mean, he never communicated the kind of meal that he wanted, but he did seem to get awkwardly mad about the one you made for him specifically. And like, yeah, he calmed down after a minute, but that was weird, right? And then you start like thinking of all of these things that were all signs that actually this person was not just a little controlling, but like really controlling. or kept you away from your family. Like that, you start thinking about like the ways that they isolated you, the ways that they, like anytime that you tried to talk about something that was important to you, they started demeaning that thing. They started like making fun of you for it a little bit. And at first you thought it was just gentle ribbing, but like the more you realized, like the longer you went, the more you started to understand that, oh no, they're not just gently ribbing me about this thing that I like. They're actively trying to make me feel like my likes are lesser. They can talk about their likes, but when I talk about mine, I get to be made fun of specifically. And you start realizing as you go through all these things, like there were actually a lot of red flags with this particular abusive individual. And as you start like thinking about them in hindsight, they all seem really, really fucking obvious, but it wasn't really obvious to you while you were in the moment. That's the same way that I think Steve Hofstetter is looking at this stuff. He is looking at these things as the red flags that should these things continue happening, should we continue down this path, should this domino fall, there's another domino in front of it. And we know what that domino might look like. And there's another domino in front of that. And it gets the idea of what the domino looks like. It's vaguer and vaguer and vaguer as you go. But we know that at the end of those dominoes, at the end of those period, there is a form of genocide. Now, I made the case in my video where I pointed out that a trans genocide is in fact happening, that any nation that learned from World War II, learned from what the Holocaust was, and wanted to unite its constituents against an enemy, because that is what fascism tries to do. It unites people against an enemy. That is it's not just a hallmark of fascism, but fascism uniquely does this a lot more than others. It helps to keep that enemy around for as long as possible. And it helps to not push the needle too far on what people can do to hurt that enemy, because that will stop other countries from intervening. Any country that learned the lessons from Nazi Germany would instead engineer scenarios where, well, let me explain something else. Have you ever had a job where your employer started cutting your hours? You were working 40 hours, now you're working 32. Now you're working 22. Now you're working 12. And you're told that it's just because there's not a lot of hours available, but everybody else around you still has 30 or 40 hours, so you know that that's really not the case. And you start noticing that the shifts you're given, you're no longer given mid shifts, you're given an opener, and then you're given a closer. Of the 12 hours you have on the schedule, you have an opener into a fucking closer. And you're wondering, like, who the fuck does this? And anybody who's been in this scenario knows what's going on. You're being fired. But instead of firing you, they are trying to get you to leave. They are trying to get you, for whatever reason, to quit your job. Now, there are plenty of reasons for this. Jobs will do this because they want to make sure they don't have to pay your unemployment, but job wants you to do that. So, now apply that scenario to a nation that has done, let's say in the last year, 250 different bills that are against transgender people and their rights. I'm pulling that number out of my head, but I know for a fact that it's actually higher. If I were to go, Dead Domain, thank you so much for the raid. How you doing? How are you doing? What are you doing over there? We are covering this guy right here, Brad. I don't know his last name, but he seems to be a very like enlightened centrist that it leans right, basically, from what I'm saying. Maybe I'm incorrect there. I don't know enough about this individual yet. But if a country repeatedly makes it inconvenient for a trans person to simply exist, there are only two scenarios that will be presented for that trans person. There will be detransitioning, which we actually see statistics of that going up as social conditions for trans people worsen. Or the other scenario is pretty obvious. A trans person fucking kills themselves. Now, I'm not going to use the term unalive or sewer slide. I'm just going to say fucking kills themselves because, let's be honest, if there can be a Family Guy clip of Peter fucking shooting himself, then I'm sorry, but I can say what this actually is. If a country wanted to oppress a group of people into silence, then making that group disappear by a combination of detransitioning and suicide would be a way to go about it that would not raise the hackles and alarms of other countries the same way that the Holocaust did. And it would still be very effective at all of the uniting measures that fascism usually likes to use to keep its people in line with their strongmen peace through strength bullshit. Anyway.
Or protecting anyone. It's about bigotry. This law.
I think you're going to have a problem convincing people that accurately reflecting biological reality on paperwork is inherent bigotry. That's going to be a tough sell. Most people are not.
Man, Nazi Germany was terrible. The Holocaust was awful, but the trains did run on time. What's the word for that? What was the word that was coined after the Nuremberg trials? The banality of evil. The most fascinating thing. Small Blue Frog, thank you for the follow. Tea Leaf says, yo, I never used Twitch. This is weird. Hi, how's it going? The most fascinating thing about people who want to hurt other people when they have institutional power is that their actions seem secretarial. The whole point of the banality of evil is that the scariest thing about the people who are able to commit the most heinous acts is that slow normalization of it makes it seem like it's just a background thing in your life. It's a terrifying prospect because so many of us are convinced, I'd say damn near almost all of us are convinced, that we can recognize evil when we see it. Lance of Wolves says E. Most of us want to believe we can recognize evil when we see it. Most of us want to believe we even have a working definition for what evil is. But the reality is, most of us not only don't have a good working definition of that, but we also are just terribly ill-equipped to actually notice it when it occurs. We can kind of tell when it happens to us, because, like, we feel it, but we're really bad at noticing it in legislation. We're really bad at noticing it in our day-to-day lives. But almost all of us, on some level, are convinced that we are good at recognizing it. There are times where I'll watch a video and I'll be, setting up for a video response, and I will miss something that my chat goes, wow, Suris missed this thing. And when I look at it, I'm like, oh, that was really obviously a thing that person said that's in poor taste, but like it just glanced by me.
I'm going to be on board with that, my dude.
This law is about 87 backwards prejudiced Neanderthal state senators who are so afraid of something they don't understand that they would rather strip 20,000 people of their civil rights than learn something new. If the government can do this to them, then the government can do this to you. And if you're not appalled by this, I am appalled by you.
Oh no. Friends, we've let him down. There's so much to unpack.
Okay, so I feel like the sarcastic, like, let me just smile and nod to the camera thing. I get it. I understand, like, that's a part of the performative nature of being on the internet, but my God, it sounds so scummy sometimes. I do it too. Like, I'm not saying that, like, I am immune to this, but there are some times when I see it and I'm just like,
back there, but like this idea that, well, if they can do this to trans people, they can do this to you. Like what do you mean?
Okay, so the point is, I'm just gonna bring up the poem. I feel like anybody who is even like a mild student of history will know why this is the case. Okay, we're at the Holocaust Memorial again, but the reason that you point out, hey, by the way, they can do this to you, it is about eliminating your rights. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not the socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out for the Jews because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now, I'm not saying this poem to, like, stand on a pedestal and go, behold my moral superiority. Like, no, the point is, the way that regimes function when they have an enemy that they want to unite its constituents against is they will take rights from the least of us, the people that it is easiest for them to otherize, the people that it is easiest for them to scrutinize, the people that it is easiest for them to organize people against. They will enact laws against those people. And once they successfully do that, eventually they run out of enemies. They run out of enemies in that category. And so they have to move to the next broad category. So, like, how many people truly can call themselves communists? How many people can truly believe or can truly say that they believe in a stateless, classless, moneyless society? I would argue that there are more people who believe in socialism. There are more people who think that we could just democratize the workforce. And then you get the trade unionists. These are the people who are still pro-capitalist, but they just want to have more power within that structure. There are more trade unionists, likely, than there are socialists. Now, again, those numbers may not be perfectly accurate. You go for the least of us until you can get to all of us. The point of genocide, the point of any argument against it or about it, is not that, hey, we should stop the killing of multiple people. That's the end. That's when genocide succeeded. The point is to not get to that point. The point is to stop that. Let me give you another analogy, and maybe this will help this part make sense. And then maybe we'll continue some more of the video. But how many of you go to the doctor and get checkups? How many of you have had the experience of going to the doctor and finding out that you have been ill with something terrible for months or years? And how many of you remember that in a previous conversation with a doctor, when you brought up a problem, that problem was minimized by that doctor? I'm sure a non-zero amount of you have had this exact scenario where you've had something that worried you, and a doctor just said, it's nothing to be worried about. It's not that big a deal. And then years and years down the road, suddenly you need an expensive surgery, or you need a really, really strong medication, or you've been diagnosed with a now chronic condition when there were preventative steps that could have been taken earlier on. But because it was minimized, you had to deal with the repercussions of that minimization for now the rest of your life. Something that could have been handled in its early stages now could not be handled in any way, shape, or form. It can now only be managed. That is a frustration that a ton of Americans have with our medical system. But now let's talk about the fact that when we're talking about genocide, we are looking at those red flags, we are looking at those problems, and we are saying, oh my God, look at this red flag. This is one of the steps that we can use to diagnose a genocide in progress. And the goal is to stop it. The perfect scenario is that 10 years from now, everybody that's pointing out the trans genocide stuff is called a fucking lunatic because trans people are then thriving. That is the ideal. That is the goal. When you raise the alarm about that stuff, it is to prevent it from happening. Now, people who actually study genocide won't call you a lunatic for that because, by the way, did you know that actually one of the steps in a successful genocide is that denial, whether or not it happens? Just in case any of you wanted that little fun bit of history. The ideal is to stop it before it gets that bad. But when we're talking about trans people, we've already got classification down. We've already got symbolism down. Like, you can find a fucking trans flag anywhere. Like, there you go. And there are people who, like, will proudly wear their trans flags. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just understand that is part of stage 2. Then you get to stage 3, the discrimination. Well, we already have laws that are doing that. Then we have stage 4, dehumanization. Think about every single pundit that tries to argue that, like, trans people are inherently predators. Stage 5, organization. Think about all the times that the Proud Boy movement or anybody has tried to organize against fucking Drag Queen Story Hour, despite it not actually being a trans thing, but they believe wholeheartedly that it is. Stage 6, polarization. Propaganda begins to be spread by hate groups. Boy, howdy, we've been dealing with that a lot. And then, of course, stage 7, we already talked about that. And then stage 8 is the actual persecution. We are getting there. We have done every one of these steps in some form or fashion already. Because when we're talking about the extermination, again, when I made my video on this, I made the case that the way that you would exterminate a group without causing the alarm bells to ring about countries who would want to stop you is by causing those people to eliminate themselves. And I still stand by that. So I say all that so that you can understand that I'm not coming, and most people who argue about this are not coming from a place of hysteria. We are coming with receipts, like quite literally.
I don't want any bad things done to trans people, but this doesn't apply to anyone else because no one else has their sex incorrectly listed on their driver's license.
Ah, so you do understand the analogy about the rich person and the poor person and the bridge. So you do get it.
the law only says that if you have the wrong sex on your government documents, that they'll be canceled and you'll have to get new ones. So that literally, they can do this to you. They literally can't do it to anyone except the people for whom the law applies. Like,
okay, they literally cannot make it illegal to be a communist and make that affect you because you're a socialist. They literally can't make it illegal to say socialist rhetoric and that affect you because you're a trade unionist, actually. It actually can't affect you. Like, no, that's not how this works. Pull your lens back. My suggestion, Brad, would be pull your lens back. Your lens is so narrowly focused on the individual factual statements that the spirit of the law, the intent of the law, and the intent of the speaker have all completely disappeared for you.
I don't understand what that's even supposed to mean. And I'm sorry, but it's not like Neanderthal ignorance or that we just don't want to learn something new, that we believe in biology and sex as an immutable characteristic. Except
for all of the sexual things that we can change. Except for all of those things. We argue that one of the methods of sexual representation is gonadal representation, and we can straight up fucking remove those. We argue that one of them is genitalia representation, and we can change that. We argue that one of the facets of sexual or of sex is, the dimorphism between male and females, the shape of the body, and by the way, hormones change that. So, like, I'm sorry, but the lived experience of trans people is that those are not quite as immutable as you might think. And again, when we're talking about gametes, if we're going to talk about gametes specifically, I'm sorry, but there are very few people on the fucking planet who look at a person and go, how your gametes doing, Goyle? I don't think that happens.
It's not, like, that's actually... That's the opposite of that. That's like the objective scientific reality. And then these are the people, the kind of activist crowd who lobbied for this sort of thing, who are denying science and denying reality. And
they're not denying science and denying reality. It's just that, what's the joke? That y'all are operating from Biology 101 and we are operating from Biology 102. I would highly recommend anybody who has not already, please check out Forrest Valkai's video, Sex and Sensibility. If you would like to know more about how sex actually works. It turns out, actually, the hormone washing that people tend to go through, both in the womb and when they go on HRT, tends to have more of an effect on their outward appearance and mood and like everything else than you might think.
Saying you should be able to, because remember, guys, this is not gender identity. For so long, they told us, gender identity is something different. We acknowledge biological reality and biological sex. But then, quietly, they tried to redefine sex as gender identity and erase the concept of sex. So it's like your driver...
Nobody's erasing the concept of sex. That's not what's happening here. Is this guy having a staring contest with Kash Patel?
License probably should and does need to reflect your biological sex to the extent that sex is relevant for, who goes in what locker room, or... God forbid, like your birth certificates.
Oh, for who goes in what locker room? Okay, cool. So now we can pull up the studies on how often trans women are actually sexually assaulted when they go in the locker rooms and bathrooms that do not align with their gender identity, because the rate of trans assault on cis women or cis men is far lower than the rate of assault on trans people when they are in the area that does not align with their gender identity. But I think at that point we're halfway through the video, and I do have a Zoom link from Vice Rhino, but I do want to cover a little more of that.
Changing your birth certificate. I mean, how are we supposed to know who's actually male and who's actually female? If you can...
Why did you fucking ask? And again, my experience is that the government has a history of changes of gender marker on documentation such that they can back ID. Actually, you know what? Just out of curiosity, just straight up curiosity. You know how I know that the government has a history of that? Because how else would they know whose licenses are invalid? How would they know whose licenses are invalid in this scenario if they did not have that documentation meticulously handled? There's only one way that they can have those numbers. And that is if they know the people who changed their gender marker. And if they knew the people who changed their gender marker, then every argument that we should have it changed kind of goes out the fucking window.
Go all the way back to your birth certificate and change everything.
Also, can I also point out just fun thing Just a really, really fun thing. Did you know that nobody fucking asks for your ID when you go to the bathroom? Did you know that nobody fucking asks for your ID when you go in a locker room? Did you know that? Anybody who steps outside and, like, goes out in reality knows that. So this can't be for that. Nobody's paper pleasing you when you go into a fucking bathroom, and the people who do are weird and should be shot. Jesus fucking Christ.
Because there are some aspects of society and civilization that we've decided biological sex matters. Like prisons and who goes in what prison and who plays in what sport and many other things. And I have always and always will support, and I will push back on right-wing people who, the Michael Knowleses of the world, who want to, deprive trans people of rights, make it illegal for adults to transition, put them in insane asylums, other things. I totally reject all of that. I will always support trans adults' right to live however will make them happiest to the extent they're not hurting anyone else. But there is not a...
But they're not hurting anybody else. Hold on. But they're not hurting anybody else by going into the locker room. That doesn't hurt anybody else. That doesn't hurt anybody.
You cannot recast this as a civil right, that you have a civil right to list factually incorrect information on your government documents. I don't know. Do I have a civil right to put my height as 6 foot if I'm a 5'7" man? No.
What if you medically changed it? Just out of curiosity, let's just be full medicalists for a minute. What if you got a surgery that changed your height? What if you did that? Where they fucking break your legs and add a fucking titanium brace in between. Now suddenly you've got extra height that you didn't have before. I'm just a little curious right now. Could you not then legally write down on your documentation that your height is different? Because it is at that point. And again, let's say you have a trans woman who has had vaginoplasty and has had implants and has been on HRT for fucking 10 years. Like, how many changes have to be made before you're able to do that? Like, where is your line there? And if there is no line there, then why bring up this point about height when that is a characteristic that we could change with surgery? PJ says, I know people do that, but I feel like your proportions would be so off. Yeah, but there are people who have weird proportions in general. Soccer says, here's another thing. Should his ID card show his weight at birth? Should it be required to show a baby picture instead of a more current one? Should it be required to show hair and eye color at birth? Memory Martin says, or someone with glasses/lenses that gets LASIK. Yeah, like, how many physical characteristics can we modify before this point just doesn't make any sense? That said, I do think that is about the end of this video that I can do, not just because we're at 1 hour and 3 minutes, despite the fact that I've ran the video on 1.5 speed, but I also have a Zoom link from Rhino that I do need to get to. So if y'all want me to cover more of any of this guy's stuff, especially when I have more time to dedicate to it, let me know. But I do feel like there is an internal frustration of mine where it is very easy to say bullshit. It's very easy to say bullshit, and it is very hard to debunk it in the same amount of time that it takes to say it. If I say the world is flat, debunking that requires me to do a laser experiment, for instance. It is so easy for me to say an incorrect statement. It is way harder, is always way harder to debunk an incorrect statement. It takes more mental energy in order to do that. Jessica Davis says, have you gone over the Kansas law yet? Yes, I did, and that video should be going out on the secondary channel. And the Kansas law is what is broadly being talked about here, but I'm talking about a lot more than just the Kansas law here. Progress says, a lie goes around the world twice before a truth has its shoal. Yup. That said, if you guys enjoyed this content, if you guys like what I'm doing over here on the channel, please let me know in the comment section below, and let me know if I can improve anything, if that is what you would like to do as well. I do really, really like getting constructive criticism. On top of that, please consider maybe supporting my Patreon if you want to. YouTube gets harder and harder to be a sustainable way to operate as people's views go down and as our RPM goes down, and all kinds of things with YouTube get weirder and weirder. So for those of you who do support me on Patreon, thank you very, very much for that. I appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Let a couple friends know what I'm doing over here if you find merit in that, and hopefully I will see you on the next one. Insert end of video tagline here for now. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.